Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So here's another deck profile for you guys today. So I'm going back to an old classic. This time it's on Counter Fairies. So as promised, I did make this deck very budget friendly, especially because the majority of what this deck is, you can easily get it out of a structure deck. I know the structure deck isn't really available in stores anymore, but you can easily just get the singles. I mean, this deck is so low rarity, is that like there's only like maybe a few expensive cards, but even then the budget should be way less than $100, probably about maybe 60 tops. But overall, but yeah, anywhere between $60 to $70 tops is really how much you're going to be spending for this deck. And one thing I also like about this strategy is that it relies heavily on its counter traps. You almost rarely never go into your extra deck almost at all, so you're mostly just going to be focusing on the main deck. So yeah, it's pretty nuts. Now this is not like a top tier strategy or anything like that. So like if someone red reboots you, then you're kind of in a tough spot. But thankfully that card's at 1. I know I would like to have that card back to 3, but you know it is what it is. But also one thing for sure is that this deck can easily recycle its counter traps too. So yeah, like the object really is just like fill up your board with like with really powerful fairy monsters that just basically generate you more advantage and just keep stunning your opponent left and right and basically just not allowing them to play. But anyway, figured I'd show you guys what I got this time, and yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So this is a 40 card deck, starting with, I'm just going to go and get the one-ofs out of the way. One Sacred Arc Aeronite Parshath. So basically what this card reads is that if you activate a counter trap or negate the activation of a spell, trap, or monster effect, except during damage step, you can banish 2 other fairy monsters from your hand, field, or graveyard. Special summon this card from the graveyard if it was there when you activated the negated effect, or from the hand, even if not. So basically you can summon from hand or grave. But you can also bring them out from one of those counter traps anyway, so yeah, sometimes you don't even need to use that part. And if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, add 1 Parshath card or counter trap from your deck to your hand. So this basically searches out all counter traps. So that's basically what you need them for. 1 Archlord Christia. It's very easy to get 4 fairy type monsters in the grave, but you have to have exactly 4. So keep in mind the word exactly. So Sacred Arc Aeronite Parshath can kind of manipulate the graveyard if you really have to, but I mean, in general, it's really not hard to get your fairies into the grave and just kind of like turbo into this anyway, but yeah. But basically, it's a Vanity's Fiend. In fact, a bigger Vanity's Fiend. So yeah, it's pretty easy. And if this card is special summoned, you can target 1 fairy type monster in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. Neither player can special summon monsters. Of course, that's already given. But anyway, moving on. 3 copies of Bountiful Artemis. So this is probably the best of the fairy monsters that you're going to be playing. Each time a counter trap is activated, immediately after it resolves, you draw 1 card. So this doesn't technically start a chain. So it's, yeah, like this card just lets you keep drawing more. And if you can manage to get all 3, you basically get to draw 3 cards after activating just 1 counter trap. So yeah, it's pretty nuts. Next, that's probably the other best fairy monster, Guiding Ariande. So basically what this card does is that while it's in your pendulum zone, you don't pay life points, and you do not discard cards to activate counter traps. So basically, in other words, you don't pay cost. So Guiding Ariande, so you can just let you activate Solemn Judgment or Solemn Strike without paying any life points or having your life points, whatever. So that's pretty good. So like, yeah, no cost is required as long as this is in your pendulum zone. And one thing that's also cool about this card is that it has a pretty decent monster effect too. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can reveal 3 counter traps from your deck. Your opponent chooses 1 for you to add to your hand, and you get to shuffle the rest back to your hand. So it's basically pantheism. But yeah, it does so much for you, and that's what I love about it. Of course, you do have to hard draw into it, but thanks to the draw power that this deck does provide, it's really not hard to get into it. Moving on, 2 copies of Minerva. So basically, she gets stronger for every counter trap you activate and resolves. She gains 500 attack points. So yeah, and if Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can add 1 counter trap with a different name from your grave back to your hand. So she recycles your counter traps. For the other one-ofs, 1 Matil, Sage of the Sky. So this gives you life points every time a counter trap activates. And of course, if Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls. 1 Power Angel Valkyria. If you negate the activation of a spell, trap, or monster effect, you can add 1 light fairy monster from your deck to your hand. So this basically searches out Archlord Christia for you. And of course, 1 Barrier Statue of the Heavens. Of course, this doesn't work against the Drytron matchup, but I mean, I don't really see a whole lot of Drytron anyway, so I mean, I figured, you know, it's a Barrier Statue, why not? And for the only hand trap I am running, 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light, since, you are running fairies. This gives you access to 2 already, so more fuel for your Arc Lord Christia. And that pretty much rounds up the monsters, so that's 16 monsters total. Alright, so moving on to spells already. For my draw power of choice, I'm playing 3 copies of Pot of Ixtrav. So yeah, this is probably going to be like one of the only expensive cards of the deck. Herald of the Orange Light, kind of, but that card kind of goes up and down from price, so try to get it at the lowest rarity. But anyway, Pot of Extravagance, definitely a great card. Again, you almost never go into your extra deck, so you can kind of, just afford to pay away your extra deck cards. So yeah, so I mean, the chance to get 2 is pretty good. Now, of course, you do have to activate this at the start of your main phase 1, so it's not as good as Pot of Prosperity for that reason, but honestly, I think the draw 2 is still just as good because, you want hand advantage rather than just searching for 1 card. And besides, I am running the budget version of Prosperity, 2 copies of Duality. So yeah, you get to look at the top 3 cards to add any card you want. You can't special summon, but it's fine. Like, you don't special summon all too often, but when you do, it's usually kind of early on rather than late game. So yeah. Moving on, 1 copy of Card of Demise. I mean, who doesn't like to draw 3 cards? For this deck, I am running 3 copies of Ties of the Brethren. Again, you basically activate this very early on, especially if you have the right fairy monsters. You pay 2,000 light points, special summon 2 other ones of the same type and level. And of course, you can't special summon any more monsters for the duration of that turn, but that's fine. You're not really going to be doing that. And you can't conduct your battle phase. But again, if you're first turn player, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, Ties of the Brethren, pretty nuts. And of course, since some of the cards do require, well, don't really require, but do have effects involving Sanctuary in the Sky, I am running 2 copies of the Sanctum of Parsha, which does count as Sanctuary in the Sky while it's on the field or in the grave. Fairy monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense points, and set spells and traps cannot be destroyed, or cannot be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And once per turn, you can target a total of 3 fairy monsters and or counter traps with different names in your graveyard, place them on the top of the deck in any given order you want. So definitely a good way to recycle your resources. And that pretty much rounds up our spells. Now from here on out, it's going to be nothing but counter traps. So starting with 3 copies, which you pretty much already saw this one coming. 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. 3 copies of Solemn Strike. I'm only playing 2 copies of Warning just because, I think Judgment and Strike are a little bit better. But yeah. But just to kind of like troll my opponent, I am running 2 copies of Drastic Drop-Off. So for those who don't know what this does, when your opponent adds a card or cards from their deck to their hand, including drawing, you must discard, well, they must discard 1 of those cards. So you can effectively just play this during their draw phase and just like, that's like, nope, no top decking for you. So it's a good way, just, yeah, kind of put your opponent back a turn, basically. 2 Divine Punishment. So it's an Omni Negate. So as long as you have Sanctuary in the Sky, you can activate this card. And of course, 1 copy of Rebirth of Parshath. You reveal a counter trap, and then discard a card or pay life points, and pay life points. But again, with Guiding Arianda, you don't actually do any of that. You just reveal the counter trap, and it's also an Omni Negate. Plus, it lets you special summon a Parshath monster from your deck or your extra deck. So pretty good way just to kind of like get out your big boss monster. But overall, that's pretty much it. All right, now moving on to the extra deck. The extra deck is going to be pretty self-explanatory. 3 copies of Herald of Mirage Lights. So it requires 2 monsters with the same type and attribute, except tokens. When a spell, trap, or effect is activated, quick effect, you can send 1 fairy monster from your hand to the grave, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. And if this card is in your position is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, you can add 2 ritual monsters, which again, you don't typically do that anyway. You're just going to mostly just do it for the Omni Negate if you do bring this out. But overall, again, you don't really touch the extra deck too much. 2 Barricade Board Blocker. It does occasionally come up if I want to protect the continuous spell, but overall, just a good way just to protect your continuous spells basically. 2 Celestial Night Lord Parshath. You can discard 1 card, add 1 Sanctuary in the Sky, or 1 card that lists Sanctuary in the Sky in its text. So like if your opponent happens to get rid of 1 and then you do activate the Rebirth of Parshath, you can effectively bring this out with its effect, and then of course this card lets you add another copy of Sanctum of Parshath. But anyway, if Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, and you can add 1 fairy monster instead. So yeah, it has 2 different ways to search. If another face-up fairy monster you control is sent to the graveyard except during damage step, you can banish one fairy monster from your graveyard, special summon one fairy from your hand whose level is higher than the banished monster, so not too bad. And I'm only running one copy of the Synchro 1 Avenging Knight Parsha. If I had more, I would run more, but once per turn, you can change the battle positions of one face-up monster your opponent controls. During battle between the attacking card and the defense position monster, whose defense is lower, you can do piercing damage, basically. And then just for filler, I'm running one copy of Hippo Shinigami. I mean, it requires 2 lights. Security Dragon, Borlo Dragon. I mean, I don't really bring these out, so, like, yeah, they're just there for filler. But I guess for, like, Dogmatica players, you know, Maximus is one card I don't typically like to deal with. 3 Intes and 1 Omega. So, it does come up, you know, again, if you happen to deal with that Dogmatica matchup. Alright, and now for the side deck. I'm actually running quite a few going second cards. 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More, just because, you know, I don't want to get disrupted. So, yeah. And then a good card to kind of go in tangent with your Pot of Extravagance, since, you know, you can only activate that at the start of the battle phase, or at the start of the main phase. You can activate this during standby phase. 3 copies of Book of Moon. And the reason for this is simply because it forces out negates. And, again, you can activate this on standby. Your opponent has no choice but to cancel it out if they don't want their stuff getting booked. And that way you're free to go and activate your Pot of Extravagance more freely. To deal with like dark heavy strategies, mainly like PK right now, or Destroy Phoenix Enforcer, I am running 3 copies of Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. It's not a counter trap, unfortunately, but it's a pretty solid floodgate considering that this deck is light. So, yeah. A sight tech of mine, running 3 copies of Grand Horn of Heaven. So during your opponent's main phase, when they would special summon a monster, negate the summon, and if you do, they get to draw 1 card, but they have to skip their current main phase. So that's pretty funny. So, like main phase 1, if you negate one of their summons, they're forced to go into their battle phase. And if they go into main phase 2 and they try again, you negate that effect too, and they're instantly going to their end phase. So pretty funny. And of course, just to deal with like decks that rely on like specific spells, like Invoke, for example, you can play Curse Seal, the Forbidden Spell, and just completely shut down their entire strategy. It's also pretty funny against the Sky Striker matchup too, because they do rely a lot on their spells. So like Widow Anchors, Engages, like there's no point in recycling those, or they're not going to be allowed to activate them anymore for the duration of the duels. So yeah, I figured just a little funny tech. But overall, that's pretty much it. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and as always, I will catch you guys again next time.